afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to our closing keynote panel for our Partnerships and Deal-Making Day at the LSX World Congress. As you have been, we've had loads of questions and comments and suggestions coming through the Q&A and chat functions all day long. So please do that, keep that going through this afternoon's panel. Delighted to have brought together a panel of some of the biggest deal makers in pharma, and I guess handing over now to the person who's going to be sort of navigating us through this discussion, Robbie McLaren with Latham. So Robbie, the stage is yours.
Thanks very much, Josh, and welcome to you all. I do hope that you're all there. Otherwise, the five of us are going to be talking to each other for the next few minutes or so. So thank you very much for joining us. And we've got a great panel lined up today with Ben Thorner from Merck, Philippe Lopez Fernandez from Ipsen, Arada Saran from Alexion, and Elizabeth Milley from BMS. And thank you all for joining us. I'll keep my input on this one to a minimum because I think you'd much prefer to hear from the industry participants. So perhaps I could open up with Philippe. Perhaps you could give us a quick rundown of your reflections on 2020 and how, when the pandemic hit, did it shift your short-term BD priorities, I suppose, if at all?
Well, thanks, Robbie. Definitely 2020 has been an interesting year for all of us, and I mean, we always surprised after, the JP Morgan, and when we look at, at the end of the year, what we had predicted and what happened. And this time, I mean, it was, we were usually quite wrong, but this time we were really wrong. And the scare of the early days of the pandemic, that got us to say, well, there's going to be less activity, we're going to be paralyzed. Transformed into actually much more activity and much more relevance of doing things together. And the pandemic is a clear example of things where partnering and doing things together in this industry is going to be absolutely critical to succeed. And this is basically what we're here for. So that has been a very interesting an interesting year for the industry and for us, in our jobs of bringing new opportunities.
And I know, Aradana, your focus perhaps changed towards the end of the year when you agreed a merger with AstraZeneca. But how were you approaching 2020 in the run up to that, or had that always been the plan, I suppose?
No, not really. Actually, I would say that 2020 was a very interesting year because we started the year at the end of 2019. We had announced the acquisition of Achillion. So we closed that, in the beginning of 2020. And then we actually did the acquisition of a company called Portola, which is based out on the West Coast, for 1.4 billion. And we did that transaction fully remotely, as well as the entire integration process and close process. And that lasted till the end of the summer. And obviously on top of the M&A activity, the usual reporting and everything being done remotely. And yes, even the AZ transaction. So we did and closed 2 buy sides and then our own sale, which was all done remotely. So in some ways, I would say deal making has become more efficient in terms of data rooms and things like that. That was always sort of electronically done. I would say that nothing really beats face-to-face interaction, and especially in negotiations and reviewing contracts and when it comes down to the wire and finishing things, but and just the trust and the relationship you can build when you have the face-to-face interaction, because in transactions a lot of issues become very tricky, and solving through them, having that trust is really important to solve through them. So that would be my take on transactions.
And Elizabeth, I suppose BMS was approaching 2020, at least from an M&A perspective, still with the acquisition of Celgene pretty closely in your rearview mirror. I mean, how did it change your priorities as the pandemic kind of took hold?
Yeah, thank you, Robbie. I mean, I actually was one of the people who joined in the midst of the pandemic. So I joined in March of last year, end of March of last year. So the company was already in the work from home. And so I am in my virtual office and have yet to be in my office. So it's a topical question. You know, the reality is that the pandemic didn't really change any of our priorities. And I think, you know, with the exception of maybe a couple of weeks and months where we were all kind of adjusting to what this new, you know, quasi-normal was going to be, you know, we've been, you know, continuing to focus in on partnerships as well as acquisitions that can strengthen and deepen our therapeutic franchises. And, you know, you saw us throughout 2020 be very active with a number of, you know, smaller acquisitions that were meaningful in our oncology business, including the acquisition of Forbius. Also done all remotely, although we'd known them for some time back when we could actually meet in person. The global in-license to the Dragonfly IL-12, which we concluded as well in the summer. And then, you know, ultimately the acquisition of MyoKardia in October, which was also done 100% remotely. And so all of those were focused on bringing innovative technologies and innovative products into our portfolio that would help deepen and expand. And I think that the urgency around ongoing partnerships and ongoing development remains as we head into 21. You know, one of the things that I think that Philippe mentioned, and we'll talk more about, is the fact of increased industry to industry partnership. Collaboration amongst industry participants has been a hallmark for all of us. It maybe is not as well recognized outside of the biopharma community, but I do think that the partnerships have been taken to an even higher level. Certainly what we've seen over the last couple of weeks with folks that, you know, are not in the vaccine development, but are lending their resources to bear for manufacture. We announced this morning a very important partnership with Rockefeller University, where we are going to be helping them to bring to market a very, very important compound for treatment of COVID-19, and we think for some of the other potential areas. And so it's a hallmark of I think really showing what the power of the industry is when companies come together. And you see that with just the dramatic developments of being able to bring vaccines to market so quickly with partnerships between large and small and between academic and public companies.
Thanks, Elizabeth. And perhaps, Ben, if I could ask you to see how the pandemic impacted on Merck in 2020 from an M&A perspective.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Robbie. So, you know, it was really an extraordinary year, and you know, if I was going to come up with, you know, two key words that sort of sum it up, I think one would be urgency, as Elizabeth spoke to, and the other would be the need for flexibility, right? And you know, for Merck, we are of course a company that while we work in, you know, many therapeutic areas, infectious diseases and vaccines have long been an area of strength and an area of interest for us. And so when the pandemic broke, we got to work pretty quickly trying to figure out what the best ways were to roll up our sleeves and get involved. We've had, I would say, conversations with, you know, literally hundreds of organizations, from large pharma peers to academics to biotechs, and really everything in between. And you know, from a deal-making perspective, we completed, I would say, 5 significant transactions in the COVID space that were all really driven by the sense that as a planet, we really need to do everything that we can to address the medical need. So there were 2 deals that we did in the vaccine space, one with Themis and one with IAVI. There were 2 deals that we did in the therapeutic space, one with Ridgeback Bio around a molecule called molnupiravir, which is an antiviral. And then toward the end of the year, we acquired a company called OncoImmune, which has a molecule that was finishing a phase 3 study in the treatment of patients with severe COVID disease. And we're really excited in the coming weeks to see the full data set. Hopefully will be brought to light in that space. And we're hopeful, of course, that both molnupiravir and the oncoimmune molecule will make it to patients under an emergency use authorization or a full authorization in the near future. The other thing that we did, though, which I think is equally interesting and important, is we got involved in an early stage collaboration with the Institute for Systems Biology, and that was really driven by having access, wanting to have access to a large number of patient samples to be able to understand what actually happens with the human immune system when COVID-19 runs rampant. And being able to understand that immune response, we hope will help us and frankly others around the planet figure out what the best ways are to address this disease, and hopefully the insights from that kind of work. Of course, it's largely an academic exercise, so it'll be made public. And the hope is that will not only help us with respect to COVID-19, but also potentially to help us all better understand the immune system so that we can better be prepared for future pandemics.
Thanks, Ben. And look, I think one of the themes that I'm getting from all the panelists' responses is the one of kind of urgency. And I'm assuming, that urgency and that kind of energy that's created has carried on into 2021 and is driving you mentioned taking industry to industry collaborations being taken to a higher level. How do you think you're going to deploy that, if you can deploy that urgent energy in 2021? Where are you going to, how is that going to change what you do in 2021? Perhaps I start with Elizabeth this time.
It's interesting. I mean, we're as I mentioned previously, we're always following where we think that the most promising innovation is that impacts the areas, that are within our core focus. We're also looking to see other areas that we can expand and leverage our capabilities. Staying at the forefront of innovation at a time when there is so much company formation happening. Science just seems to be moving faster right now in terms of, some of the tools that we have, things like Ben just mentioned. I mean, it just, the opportunities that are out there for us to bring much needed medicines to patients in areas with ongoing unmet need is quite significant. And so I think for us, we entered the year without the normal JP Morgan partnering event out in San Francisco, but we still had, almost 300 virtual meetings during that time because it's just really important. We're obviously participating, here today and the varying different conferences throughout the year. And I think that, what Aradhana said that is quite important is, to some extent, we have gotten some benefits from efficiency. I wouldn't say that I want this to stay like this. Apologies, as we're all working from home with the life interruptions. But I think that there is some efficiency that we have gained, and people have gotten used to and embraced the virtual medium. And I would imagine that as we go forward, we're going to be able to keep some of that efficiency while still finally getting back to the place where we can meet with one another again. But ensuring that our scientists are able to actually be in the lab safely, that we're able to continue those partnering discussions, that's really probably our biggest priority as we think about this year. And then, of course, it's launches, because we are at a point where we've got a number of very important launches, some that were launched last year and are ongoing in key ramp-up phases, but several exciting launches that are pending. And, we've had to learn a lot about being able to do those in a virtual environment or quasi-virtual environment. So I would say, a lot of the same, if you will. So we'd anticipate it'll be a busy year.
And Philippe, how about you?
Well, it's about the same. I mean, I really hope that we are going to be able to resume a little bit more normality, in the later part of the year. on the other side, I mean, the urgency is there. We're going to continue to deliver. We're going to deliver on deals, on making sure that we have our priorities, and we strengthen our pipeline, and deliver on our launches, which we have also in rare disease and in oncology. So it's going to be an extremely busy year. It's we know that it's going to be also a year that is going to be disrupted still by the situation. And for deals or for launches, we know that this is going to have an impact. I think we've seen that we can do things despite the situation. And it's been good to see that it works. Is it perfect? No, it's not perfect, but we can make it happen. I think it has also changed a bit the way we look at things and the environment. And there's been a lot of and we're going to talk later about that. There's a lot of money in the markets, and there's a lot of IPOs and and other elements that are really useful for funding innovation. On the other side, it's not just about money. It's also about expertise. It's about global reach. It's about what we can bring. And I think that there's a lot of smaller companies that have realized in this pandemic that having the capacity to go global on a clinical trial, on a launch, and with the capabilities that we have as larger pharma is also important. And it's not just the access to capital that makes a difference.
And Philippe, you touched on a point that we've joked about in our sort of pre-panel sessions around simply the kind of the wall of capital that exists, and the competitive market, I suppose, that you working in your organizations find yourself in, where an IPO is not just an alternative, but a very real and very attractive one. I mean, I think one of my colleagues said that the window isn't open for the market, is that the window has been removed and nobody knows where they left it. I mean, Ben, how do you consider that? How is that, impacting upon your priorities as to, how you source targets and how you look to execute on those transactions?
Yeah, great question, Robbie. So what we've seen is exactly as you say, right? The capital markets are red hot, and that's really done a number of things. Number one, right? It has made deal making, I think, more fast paced, and it has had an upward pressure on pricing. But I would say at the end of the day, I actually don't think that any of that is altogether bad. I think we've done a couple of recent transactions with companies that were sort of had pretty firm plans to go public, and clearly for any exciting company with either exciting products or exciting technologies, they're always going to have great alternatives, right? And our job as deal makers is to provide the explanation and the opportunity that looks even better than going public, for example, right? And so in 2020 we were able to acquire a company called Velos Bio, which we're super excited about. The company was working on ADC programs against a number of projects, but at the front of the queue against a target called ROR1, and they had some really exciting data that convinced us that this was an opportunity that could really help patients in our hands, partly via our own development and commercialization capabilities, but also as we think about these opportunities, we try and think about, what's the way in which the asset or the company could actually be even more valuable working with Merck than, for example, going alone or working with somebody else. And I think the expertise and the capabilities that we have in the oncology space with our Keytruda franchise really make that an exciting prospect. And similarly, a couple of years back, we acquired a company called Peloton, similarly on the eve of IPO. And as boards of directors and shareholders are thinking about the IPO process versus the opportunity for an acquisition, I think there's a lot of things to like about each of those opportunities. Certainly, from an acquisition, they have cash on the barrelhead, right? And they have the prospect to see that asset go into the hands of a company that's got really extraordinary capabilities and resources that, again, can bring that molecule to really make a big difference to patients. And that's kind of what we're about.
And Aradhana, I suppose you can have a somewhat sort of more independent, not saying that anyone's biased here, but you can have a more dispassionate view on this, given that you've been a kind of a beneficiary perhaps of the capital markets with the announced transaction. I mean, how was it impacting on your view on the world, if you like?
Yeah, so I would say, I'm not sure we've been a beneficiary, but it definitely makes and has made doing transactions harder. I think the good news is that there is a lot more interest in biotech. There's a lot more money going there. There's a lot more innovation being fueled, which is all good overall for the industry. And I hope that all the capital that has been raised in the last couple of years and this year will eventually result in true innovation and therapies for patients. So I think that's all great. I think though where people and companies don't realize, and where I would say me and hopefully a lot of our panelists think the same way, I sort of call it the hot potato challenge. And we as Alexion, or any company that is sort of pharma company that's commercial, we're like at the end of the hot potato chain. And there's the company formation happening. The VCs then pass the hot potato to the crossover, and the crossovers pass it to the IPO investors, and the IPO investors pass it to the follow-on investors, and all of that is great. But a lot of these companies are actually just focused on what's the next milestone, and just raising money to get to that next milestone, versus our focus is very different, which is how are we going to actually get this to market, and who's going to pay for it, and how are we going to get reimbursement? Is there an unmet need? What will the landscape look like 3, 4, 5, 7 years from now? And therefore, what are the things that you need to do between now and then to make sure you actually not just get it to market, but get it to market, get paid. And we're seeing the reimbursement landscape changing, and will change dramatically, both in the US and Europe. And governments are going to be stretched for budget, and all of those are realities. And I'm not sure everybody realizes that there's a trade-off, and it's really a question between a short game and a long game, and where you are in that hot potato chain.
I like it. I'm going to steal that one, I think, Aradhana. I like that hot potato chain next time I'm working on a transaction.
And there's nothing wrong in being, in passing the hot potato. It's a great business.
Yeah.
But you have to ask yourself, what is the business you're in? And if you're in the business of making money, it's great to be anywhere along that hot potato chain. If you're in the business of actually getting drugs commercialized and getting reimbursed for it, that's a different business.
Yeah, and one of the questions that has come in from Hans-Peter Wiese is and without wanting to put words in your mouth, is COVID has taught us the lesson of how do we speed up getting to market. And whilst money is one solution to speeding up the process of getting to market, it's not. The money has to be spent in the right areas and by the right people, I suppose. It's not just I have a pool of money and therefore I can go and spend it and make it go faster. I think Ben in particular is talking about making sure that you plan, using Ardana's potato analogy, you plan for the future rather than just the next recipient. So look, it's a very interesting, there's definitely pros and cons to the red hot market, I suppose. And again, going back to that theme of kind of urgency and continued exploration in the science. I mean, we've just seen the announcement today of the Jazz Pharma and GW Pharma transaction, which is, GW Pharma being a focus on the cannabinoids. We've also seen a lot of activity in psychedelics, in particular in the kind of IPO market and the crossover market. Oh, sorry. I mean, Philippe, perhaps I can ask you, there's, what were considered 2 or 3 years ago to be on the fringes of mainstream pharma, are we going to see more bringing in of the kind of fringe into the mainstream, given there's just is it a need just for a home for the capital to go to, or is it part of this urgency trend?
Well, I'm not sure that there's, that this is going to be a huge difference. I mean, it's clear that in the past 5 years, we've seen more money going into oncology than any other field. And I anticipate that this is still going to be something that is very active. Just, the pace of innovation in the field is crazy, and it's exciting actually. So it makes sense, and it makes sense to be all excited about it, and it makes sense to bring this innovation as fast as we can to patients, because we can, when we look at what was happening, in the past 40 years and what happened in the space of innovation in the past 5 years in oncology, it's fantastic. But and still the unmet need is absolutely there. Now, I think that what it has brought to our attention is that there's other fields like anti-infective, maybe antibiotics, that have been vastly neglected in the past few years, and that are absolutely valid fields to invest. There's also the field of digital therapies that is that have been brought to attention by this pandemic, where there's more and more solutions that sometimes are pure therapies, sometimes are just add-on therapies or managing side effects, but are real solutions for patients. So I think it's also redistributing the interest of the industry into areas that had been a bit neglected in the past, which is great.
And Elizabeth, you're nodding your head there, so I'm going to pick on you. You're clearly agreeing with Philippe. I mean, how has it changed how you're approaching your areas, your therapeutic areas for investment in 2021?
Well, one of the things that I think, going back and tying back into just the capital markets and the company formation and the available capital, one of the things that we have been doing as we continue to try and really stay in the center of the innovative ecosphere is beyond just identifying near-term clinical opportunities, like we did with Dragonfly and Forbius. We're also focused on where cutting-edge science is happening, and whether it is technologies, whether it could be specific discovery platforms and candidates, and trying to ensure that we are supporting those companies through our own investment of capital. But equally importantly, because I think this point was made previously as well, it's really getting the money isn't the hard point right now. It's also lending our expertise. And we are trying to do more of that, where we are investing earlier with companies that we think could be promising business development partners of ours in the future, but where maybe there's still more to play out, and investing behind them and investing some of our resources through the scientific advisory boards, and then as the technology does develop, where we can define some form of a specific relationship, we've then entered into it. And I think a great example of that is Repair, where we had an initial investment and SAB role, and then subsequently last spring entered into a formal partnership with them. And I think that is a place where there's a lot that the industry can do to support the ongoing innovation, and it's much more than just capital. And that's important to us because, and I'm referencing again, even Rockefeller again this morning, things that maybe were not totally obvious that made sense for us based on where our current footprint as, could still be areas where we can bring an awful lot of capabilities to the table and can really help advance important programs coming to market for patients. And I think that's really ultimately what we're focused on. While we try and stay broadly within our therapeutic areas, the market will continue to change. And we've clearly seen a need for radical innovation in antivirals and antibiotics this past year. And it's terrific to see all of the work that has happened across the industry to try and bring forward further advances.
Thanks, Elizabeth. And I suppose more onto the kind of one of the questions that we've got in from the chat function is one on Nardana point about how do the panelists, or how would the panelists like to see, to see sort of potential target companies make themselves more attractive in addressing commercialization factors earlier in clinical development? I mean, perhaps, Nardana, as you raised the point, I'll ask you to comment first.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that companies can do is take into account what the end state they're trying to achieve. You would not believe how many companies we talk to who haven't even thought about what their end sort of target product profile should look like. And and having a commercial vision, even though you're still a clinical company and you're not investing sort of resources or hiring people for commercialization, trying to figure out what's that end state, what does the competitive dynamic look like, what are you trying to solve for? And we've seen companies where they try to solve for regulatory approval, but that regulatory approval alone is not enough, because the clinical and the true sort of clinical benefit is not there or cannot be demonstrated. Maybe it's just showing a biomarker, but not the clinical efficacy. And that becomes a harder sell to physicians and healthcare professionals. So I think really starting with the end in mind, and what is the market going to look like at that time, and what is the target product profile you're aiming for in order to think of reimbursement and so forth. I think the biggest challenge that the healthcare industry is going to have over the next 5-10 years, in my view, is not one of innovation. I think it's going to be one of affordability, and one where can the system actually pay for it.
And maybe Robbie, if it's okay, I'll jump in here as well.
Please.
I guess to me, there's kind of three things that are critical when we're looking at companies to partner with. One is, obviously exciting data. I mean, that is kind of where most things sort of start and finish. Having data that is really robust can be critically important. I think the second is, especially if you've got a molecule that's about to be in the clinic or that is in the clinic, having taken seriously the approach to manufacturing and CMC. I can't tell you how many times we look at opportunities and the target's exciting, the molecule's exciting, but then when you get to the CMC section, you find that in order to be able to advance the program, you actually need to go back and reinvent the process to make the molecule, and that can add literally years to the timeline. And so obviously that can really destroy value if you haven't taken that seriously. And then the third piece is sort of differentiation, and being able to explain in a very clear and cogent way what it is that's fundamentally different and superior about your molecule or your approach than what everybody else is doing. For that topic, I'll just point to two deals that we completed just in the last month or two, both in the cell therapy space. One with a company called A2, and the other one with a company called Artiva. Both of these are currently in the oncology space, and we had gotten some heat for a while about sort of sitting on the sidelines and not working in the cell therapy space. And we'd kind of been telling people for a long time, gosh, if what we're really struggling with about jumping in with both feet is seeing an opportunity to address not only liquid tumors, but also solid tumors, right? That was a really important thing for us. And secondly, the ability to have allogeneic cell therapies so that we could actually scale these therapies so that we could bring them to a lot of patients, because fundamentally that's kind of what our business has been and we believe will be for the future. And so these were two opportunities where companies working in the space were able to convince us that they've been able to kind of crack some of those key aspects to make that modality or that approach attractive to us.
I like your point, Ben, on differentiation. I think it's really, and it goes back also to some extent to the point from Ardana about the hot potato. When we look at the number of companies that are investing just at trying to take a stab at what Merck or BMS has generated, in the PD and the PD-1 field, of course, you can direct your investment at saying, okay, I'm going to grab a small part of this market, but there's still plenty of need to do better. And
Absolutely.
Instead of being the 40th PD-1 on the market, what is the innovation? How can you direct your resources, and not just the dollars, but the mind, being smart, focusing on patient needs to bring innovations where it's needed instead of just copying and following.
No, exactly.
Here, we can do better as an industry.
Okay, so now I suppose if I can ask for a little bit of crystal ball gazing, I suppose, for what we're going to see towards through 2021 and into, well, hopefully into somewhat the return to an element of normality. I think we're maybe not real normality in the near term, but hopefully something much closer to it. And Elizabeth, perhaps, we've talked previously that 2020 was noticeable in terms of, other than the Alexion deal that came in at the end of 2020, there weren't any kind of pharma mega mergers. I mean, do you think we're going to see any of that activity this year?
That one's always a little bit difficult, because I'm not sure that any of the larger companies ever really seek to or desire to enter into a mega merger. I think over history they've happened when the companies have had real needs, either for gaining scale or addressing LOEs or pipeline failures, et cetera. And I think that including our own transaction with Celgene, which we were very excited about to enter into, was a very, very large transaction, something that was certainly very different than the style of transactions that BMS had done, dating back to the Bristol and Squibb coming together. But I would tend to believe that the norm in the industry, and what we'll continue to see this year, is that the larger players will continue to access innovation through more bolt-on type M&A. And obviously all of the ongoing partnership and business development in licensing activities. I just think that that is the least disruptive way of bringing innovation into companies. If we do end up with some fundamental changes in aspects of the healthcare system and reimbursement and pricing and all of those things, that will be something for the industry to contend with. But I think that right now for us as a company, we are very focused on making sure that we're actually making the most of the launches and the pipeline that we have, and continuing to bring innovation in, as opposed to thinking about something that would be much larger. And I guess I don't really read across the industry, seeing that it's all that different for any of our industry peers. But there's always going to be opportunities that people will find where they can strike and do deals that they think will help with their long-term sustainability.
And maybe Ardana, the same question for you, if I may.
Yeah, I think, again, I don't think anything's really going to change that much. because, as Elizabeth said, every company, every of the large companies are different. And I would say that, most of big pharma sort of went through this cycle, probably in the, 2012 to 2015 timeframe, where, there were LOEs and things that they needed to address. And I think most of the companies are past that. And most of them have shifted their business models from, more primary care to more specialty care. And I think big pharma, or pharma broadly speaking, is in a very different position. Now, if you think of sort of the second group, which sort of is big pharma, but big biotech, the Amgens, Biogens, they're sort of in a different category now, where they're now looking at some of those types of challenges, given the run they've had, and the Gileads of the world. And I think they're, need to figure out how they're going to sort of continue their growth and diversification, or whatever their objectives are. And you're seeing each of them take a different sort of view on how to address that, which may or may not be through mega mergers, more through partnerships and so forth. So I think it's a little bit different, depending on where you are in the landscape.
And Ben, perhaps it would be, and Philippe, it would be remiss of us, I think, to talk about 2021, I think we are in now, and we've talked about the capital markets activity without mentioning the SPAC word. Now it's clearly a symptom of the red hot capital markets. I mean, perhaps a quick take on that from you, Ben. Will we see a SPAC actually take out a true biotech preclinical business, I suppose?
It's I'll say it wouldn't surprise me. There, as you pointed out, right, there is so much money chasing, frankly, not as many quality opportunities as we'd like. I think that the great news is, while money is flowing into SPACs, money's also flowing into lots of other corners of the marketplace. For example, some of the kind of blue chip venture capital firms, I think are really doing a phenomenal job, not only raising money, but really putting it to work, doing really interesting science. I think it's through that kind of activity that I see much more value creation. But certainly, the SPAC activity is going to continue because money's looking for returns, right? And there will continue to be arbitrage. I just don't see that fundamentally as the kind of value creation that kind of captures my imagination, and I think the imagination of some of my colleagues on the panel.
Philippe?
Yeah, maybe one point, and I would put the SPACs, but also the rush to IPO in the, to some extent to the same bucket, because there's this impression that you need to access the market, and you cannot access it fast enough and soon enough, and it's IPO, and it's and in some case using the SPAC to be on the market even faster, and the truth is, IPO and public market is not necessarily the solution for everyone, and some companies should think twice about going too early to the IPO, and the amount of distraction that it creates. Yes, it brings money, but but there's other ways to bring money, and there's ways to be more focused on delivering first, and then going IPO at the right time. So here, I think there's we've seen in 2020 a lot of IPOs that were very, very, very early, and I think that people are going to realize that it's not exactly what they wanted. But on the other side, they're bored. I mean, it's the flavor of the year. I mean, you need to IPO as fast as you can,
Yeah,
and
that's right.
and I don't think that it's a solution for everyone.
Yeah. At the end of the day, once those companies are public, right, then the next question they all face is, okay, what's the catalyst? What's the next piece of data that's going to move their valuations, right? And if you're a preclinical stage company, you know, those events are few and far between, and they take a lot of time and capital to get to.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they reduce your focus on doing the right things.
Yeah. And then, you know, we've all been through this different M&A landscape that we've been living in the last year. It's frightening to say. As we, fingers crossed, toes crossed, return to quotes normality, what is the one thing, I'll ask each of you this, what is the one thing from doing deals virtually that you would like to retain as you go back to doing deals that we might have historically done it? What is the one piece of M&A deal technology that you have preferred in the new landscape and want to keep? Maybe I start with Elizabeth.
I actually think that some of the efficiency that we found, you know, even if you were to think about it as what maybe you would have previously done all of your meetings in person, or 75% of them in person, if we could get to a place where we're, you know, maybe it's more like a third in person. You know, when I think about just the benefits that that are out there from people not transversing the world in airplanes, as much as there's a big economies, and I look forward to being on an airplane again one time soon and being back in Europe. But you know, when we think about just the sheer volume of trips and can we reduce that, can we be more efficient? I think the fact that we have all embraced the virtual video technologies, which, you know, really were not that well utilized. You know, they're much more episodic. You know, you can really have very meaningful, impactful in person, but I think you can supplement it with a lot of virtual. And I think that that's a positive. I also think that the other aspect will be, and it's maybe less on deal making, but I do think it will impact, and that is how we think about where our teams need to be. You know, as we think about even M&A targets and think about operations and teams, and do we actually need to think about people, you know, being at headquarters, or, you know, should we be thinking about keeping scientific innovators where they are, you know, close to where innovation is happening? And I do think that, you know, it's something that, you know, even prior to my joining, there were a lot of changes to the footprint for BMS on the back of the Celgene acquisition, with many more sites from an R&D perspective than BMS previously had. And, you know, it's quite important for us to continue to build on those areas where scientific innovation is happening. And I think that gives some flexibility perhaps going forward, not in all instances, but in some.
Ben, what about you?
Yeah, I think Elizabeth hit the nail on the head, right? Coming back to what we said earlier, right? Urgency and flexibility are kind of the name of the game. They certainly came into sharp focus in 2020, and if we can kind of keep that sense of urgency through 2021 and beyond, I think it'll pay enormous dividends if we can do that. And you know, I also couldn't agree more with Elizabeth's point about you know, being kind of where the science is. It's something that we've invested in, like Bristol has. We have a pretty significant footprint in the Boston area and the West Coast Bay Area, as well as in London, to try and reach a lot of the innovation that's happening in Europe. And of course, you know, China and Japan continue to be both important markets and places where there's a lot of great science happening as well. So, you know, there's frankly no substitute for being on the ground, although you know, Zoom is certainly a catalyst.
Ardana, anything to add?
No, I think they covered it. But yeah, I'd just say, you know, there is no there's no substitute for human connection and relationships. And I guess I have enjoyed Zoom, and by switching backgrounds, keeping myself entertained through the isolation of the pandemic, and probably will keep that going.
One advantage also that I think we should keep is the ability to bring the right experts from our organization that can be anywhere in the world to a specific discussion. And while we want to have a core team being in presence as soon as we can do it again, we don't need to fly an expert from Japan or from California just for a 2-hour meeting. On the other side, having this expert be really present and not just through a crappy phone connection is definitely value adding. So hopefully these are the things that we can keep.
Okay, well, look, thank you to the 4 of you. It's been great speaking to you all, and it's been a great discussion. And thanks for your time. I'll pass back over to Josh from LSX.
Fantastic, thank you, Robbie, and thank you to our panel. Some really great insights and discussions there. Thank you to Ben, Philippe, Aradhana, and Elizabeth. I guess we're very much hoping to get back to some physical normality as well. But I think what's also shown today, we're talking about some of the sort of connections that can be made as well in terms of geography. We've covered a huge amount of ground just today with some of the discussions we've had from Chinese sort of partnering through early stage partnering in Europe, and now to a panel of US deal makers talking about that. So thank you all for being a part of today, and to our panel for joining us to round us off for today's discussions. We are back tomorrow live at 9:10 for our opening presentation. I'll be talking to the EMA's head of the SME department on how the sort of regulatory perspective on this pandemic and how they've been dealing with increased workloads, and I guess also a sort of Q&A session. So start thinking of your questions now for our EMA colleagues. That's it for now. Reminder that all these presentations and panels that we've had today and indeed yesterday are immediately available on demand. So if you logged into this session a little bit late, you will be able to rewatch it. You can also rewatch all the panel and discussions from earlier if you're watching this at a later date or in a different time zone. So please do keep the conversations going, keep on posting in the chat and Q&A functions and continuing those conversations. So yeah, that's it from me for today. Big thanks again to our panel and to Robbie from Nathan for guiding us through that session. And see you all tomorrow.